Hello, and good afternoon, everyone. My name's Emran. I run the organisation that you see depicted on the right, which is the Social Market Foundation. We're a think tank that works on economic and social policy. And so we came at this issue of kind of thinking about well-being at work, from the starting point of thinking about productivity. And productivity is something that you've no doubt heard politicians and policymakers talk quite a lot about recently. And the reason for that is the UK does seem to have a productivity problem. And I thought to kind of get a shared understanding of what the scale of that problem might be, I thought, well, I'd pose you a question. And so my question is, this is slightly stylized, right, to get at sort of productivity. So if the UK worker produces on average 100 widgets per hour, how many do you think the French worker produces? So, the French worker in basically a socialist economy, right? Planned economy, lots of regulation, idle people, take very long lunch breaks. How many widgets per hour do you think the French produce if the British are producing 100 per hour? So yeah, press 1 for if you think it's 80 per hour, press 2 if you think it's the same as the UK, 3 if you think it's 120, or 4 if you think it's 130. Okay, so about a third of the audience thinks they produce significantly less than we do, and just over a third think they produce 120, and about 20% of you have got the right answer, which is the French worker produces, about 30% more per hour than we do. Now you might think, well, what does that mean to me as a business? What does that mean to at the micro level? I mean, obviously this is to do with some bigger macroeconomic issue. Well, it's not obvious that it is actually. So it's also possible to look at firm level productivity and to compare the most productive firms within a sector with the less productive firms. And when you do that, what we find is that the 25% most productive firms, their what's called gross value added per worker is treble that of the average. So that's how big the gap can be within a sector in terms of worker productivity, that the top in the sector are producing 3 times per worker per hour what the average is. So actually some of this isn't about macroeconomic stuff. Some of this is real about workplace stuff and how jobs are designed and how jobs are done. And we think about well-being at work as well. And so the research that we did to add to this is we looked at one important aspect of well-being at work, which was financial well-being. And we did this using a survey that's called the Understanding Society Survey, which is a really big panel survey. It looks at about 40,000 individuals per year. And it asks lots of questions about well-being and about how people are getting on in their lives. And one of the things it gets at is how people feel stressed and what do they feel stressed about. And what we found that when we analysed this survey is that 40% of people report that the thing that they're feeling stressed about is money. So rather than it being family or friends or where they live or whether they have enough time with their kids, 40% of people report that the source of stress for them is money, is worries about money. And for a third of people, that stress is so severe that it causes sleeplessness. And then we're able to track what some of the effect of that anxiety and sleeplessness is in terms of how people feel when they're at work. And what we find is, again, very similar. That about 4 in 10 people are reporting that they're losing concentration, that they're feeling anxious at work as well because of these worries that they have in their lives. And so the work that we did, which is a report on workplace well-being, kind of starts from this question about productivity, and we try and drill down into what does it mean in the workplace setting. And we find what it means is that, as well as a whole bunch of other things, no doubt, about how people are trained and how jobs are designed, actually financial well-being, how people feel about their finances, does seem to be a significant contributor to productivity at work. And that's probably a good moment for me to hand over to Chris and to Monica.
Thanks, Emran. Well, I think all of us in this room would recognise that people being insecure about their finances, perhaps being in debt, being close to debt, is bound to have an implication for their family life, for their sense of well-being generally. But what this report shows is that it also has an impact on everyone, whether we're in debt or not, because it reduces our national prosperity, our ability to compete in the world through those effects on productivity, which Emran has just pointed out. Now, the Financial Inclusion Commission, which I represent, is an independent commission set up with a group of experts plus represented across the political spectrum with parliamentarians. And in the report that we published a few months ago, we pointed out that Britain is facing, despite all the discussion about our national debt, is facing a real crisis of personal debt. Over 8 million people who are in serious personal debt at any one time, 13.5 million who are so close to the edge that they don't have enough to tide them over a month if their income should drop by 25%. Now, many of these are going to be people who firms that you're involved with employ. And if Emran's report is correct, and I believe he is, then very clearly that is a heavy price which those firms are paying for the fact that the people who work with them don't feel secure, are not able to focus on the main job, and their productivity therefore suffers. Now, you might ask the question, well, what's that got to do with employers? Well, the first point is that, as we've heard, the productivity implications are very considerable. But secondly, also, employers do have a responsibility because increasingly people are being called upon to take responsibility for their own finances and for their own well-being. You may say, quite rightly, I know you've heard earlier on today about the pension reforms, which places a very considerable burden of responsibility on people to work out what their pension is going to be in 30 years' time, what their cost of living is going to be in 30 years' time, what the markets are going to be doing in 30 years' time. And that means also that they need to be given some support, because you can't expect people to take that responsibility without that support unless you believe that you can teach people to fly by throwing them off the roofs of buildings. Now, what we therefore need to do is to make sure that at the workplace, people have access to a source of affordable credit which will allow them to balance their finances. All of us need credit at different stages in our lives. In fact, for most of our lives, whether or not it be through a mortgage or whether it be through credit cards or whether it be just those mechanisms for helping us smooth out the expenditure and income from day to day and from week to week. And many people, because of a lack of affordable credit, are turning increasingly to rather expensive forms. We hear a lot about the payday lenders. We don't hear so much about the increasing problem of illegal lending, the loan sharks. And when the Financial Inclusion Commission took evidence on this, we heard of one guy, former cage fighter, who loaned money up in Birmingham on the estates. And his mechanism for debt recovery would be to go and pick up your kids from school and deliver them home, with a clear message that if the debt was not paid the following week, the kids would be picked up at school. Maybe they come home, maybe they wouldn't. And people who turn to credit cards and maxing out on those, paying the minimum amount each week. Now, all of those things means that people are increasingly stressed in terms of their finances, and that therefore feeds through into their ability to do the job effectively, which is why the Commission and I myself have been very pleased to work with Neyber as one mechanism for providing, without stigma, a source of affordable credit at the workplace, and therefore to address some of the issues that Emran has pointed out. So over to you, Monica.
The UK's low employee productivity and low employee engagement has reached a critical stage, as my former speakers have identified. We commissioned this report at Neyber to try and understand why. Over the past 18 months, as we've been building out Neyber, I've managed to travel across the country and I've met many of you. Many of you have shared stories with me, and many of those stories have related to the financial stress and indebtedness of your employees. We also know that we're all striving for growth. But the problem is that we're striving for that growth in many cases without any budget at all. There is this general concept in reward where we face austerity, so we have no budget in how we reward our people. And that's tough. That's tough for all of us. And it will continue to be tough, particularly as we try and hunt for talent, and we also try to hire more and more millennials. My name's Kalia, and I'm a co-founder at Neyber. I just want to take a few minutes to tell you a story. It's a story about a conversation that I had with a friend of mine a few weeks ago. My friend Peter came over to dinner with his wife Sarah. Peter and I are actually really good friends, and Peter was in the year above me at university. Peter's about 45 years old, but lately he started to look a lot older. Peter has had the same employer for the past 5 years. He works for a large UK car manufacturer. I reckon he earns about £50,000, and in the past he's racked up a fair bit of overtime. But more recently, when I've seen Peter, he's been looking stressed. The company isn't doing as well, and clearly overseas competition is starting to bite, so production levels have been falling. But recently, when Peter came over to my house, I noticed that he looked really bad, and I said to him, "What's wrong? You haven't been looking yourself recently. Are you okay?" And he said to me, "I'm actually really stressed. I'm not sleeping very well at night. I think I'm being a pretty rubbish husband, and I'm not doing a particularly good job with the kids." Peter admitted to me that he's got himself into a messy financial situation. He's got himself, and as a result, his whole family into debt. He said it was too easy. He took out 3 credit cards, and now he owes £15,000. He said, "I can't afford to repay the debt because my interest rate is over 20%, and I'm only paying off the minimum." He said, "I'm even thinking about leaving my job. Maybe if I go and work for another employer and I can make some more money, then I can have the money to pay off the debt." I was really shocked because I haven't actually seen my friend looking like this before. And I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "You've got to do something. Have you told Sarah?" And I said, "What about talking to your employer, to your boss? Have you tried that? Would they listen to you? Would they care? Would they understand?" And he said to me, "Well, why would they care?" And I said, "Well, if they don't do anything, they're going to lose you, aren't they?" And he said, I can't talk to them. They really wouldn't understand." And I said, "Well, Pete, you've got to do something." This conversation struck me as sad, but it's not uncommon. After all, isn't it the case that as employees, we have the strongest financial relationship with our employer? Our employer pays us every month. Often they're our only source of income. Employers contribute to our pension. Employers have our whole financial future in their hands. Pete's inability to talk to his employer about his financial situation means that they will probably lose him. They'll lose his talent and they'll lose his experience. But Pete is not unusual. As Emran said, the statistics are interesting and probably are worth reviewing. 38% of us have said that in relation to our financial situation, we feel stressed. 25% of people are losing sleep. 23% are depressed. 13% of us are unable to concentrate on our duties at work. And 6% of us miss work altogether. So let's not kid ourselves. These figures point to a major contributing factor in terms of the impact of financial stress on UK's productivity. An anxious employee, a stressed employee, a tired employee, or an employee that doesn't turn up at all is neither engaged nor productive. Our general inability, just like Pete, to talk to our employer about our financial situation is actually having a major impact on both the mental and physical health of employees across the UK. Unfortunately, the taboo surrounding talking about our financial situation and also the stresses caused by money worries can actually silently grow amongst employees. Just like mental health has now become accepted, there is a need for us to be able to push past that taboo surrounding financial stress and recognise it for what it is: crippling for employees, crippling for employers, and for our organisations. All of us as employers need our employees to be physically, mentally, and financially well. We need our employees to be able to perform, ready to achieve their potential, and ready to stop looking for another job. In the past, academic research on productivity has zeroed in on issues such as the skills shortage, lack of capital investment, structural factors that, as employers, we have really no control over. But this report, this SMF report for me, identified an area where we can all make a difference. At Neyber, we're helping people just like my friend Pete. We're helping normal people across every salary bracket and every age band, people that have fallen into problems because of debt. We can work together to improve financial mindfulness for employees. We have to give them the tools for them to be able to improve their behaviours, to improve financial resilience. We can help employees in terms of giving them access to financial education and also to provide them with access to affordable lending through the workplace. From everything we've heard today, employee engagement drives productivity. But we know that. This SMF report proves that it's more than that. So we should all agree that we can work together to combat indebtedness and to cut the high cost of credit for our employees, and also to challenge that taboo. And in doing so, we can make our employees happier, more engaged, and ultimately we can increase their productivity and the productivity of the UK workforce as a whole.
Thank you very much, Chris, Emran, and Monica. Does anybody have any questions for the three speakers on a really, really important topic? Yes, Colin, down the front.
Hi, Colin Miller from Kent County Council. This is a question which goes back to the interactive session and the productivity question. I'd heard on Radio 4, so it must be true, a debate about this and why the French have a higher productivity level in the UK. And one of the reasons was the belligerent French unions, in the sense that it makes organisations more likely to invest in technology rather than people, which also means that from a French economy point of view, there is a higher unemployment rate. Are you saying that the UK can have higher employment and higher productivity within the current economic context?
Yeah, that's precisely what I'm saying. So there are clearly some macroeconomic factors in play here. You're absolutely right, the French have a higher unemployment rate. So some of what they've done is they keep less productive workers out of the workforce. Whereas in the UK, we make a different choice. And we have those people in the workforce, which might mean that average productivity is lower. But I think the thing for me that's very persuasive that actually there is something to do on this is when you look within sectors at the difference between productive firms and even the average. So I'm not even comparing the most productive firms to the least productive firms. Just compare the most productive firms to the average. The most productive firms have 3 times the gross value added per employee than the average does. So it does feel like the margin for improving productivity is really quite significant, no matter what the macroeconomics might be.
Thank you very much. I'm going to wind up there because I'm going to... Oh, sorry, you said there's another question?
Right there.
Yes, Andrew. Is there a mic on your side? Thanks.
Thank you. Andrew Drake from JLT Employee Benefits. Given the theme of today is about pension saving and the lack of it, have you done or are you planning any research around people not saving for retirement because they're too worried about their debt?
I think that SMF question.
Yeah, yes. that feels like one for me as well. So the question is, are people choosing one form of saving over another? I think on the whole, these things tend to be correlated. So people who don't have savings that are short-term savings, they tend also not to be in a position to be able to make significant savings for retirement. People who are creating short-term savings pools, so enough to cover an emergency expense, they then also become more likely to have long-term savings. So my sense would be probably the kind of journey that you want to take people on is develop the short-term savings first, because that's clearly more important. It's almost pointless to have a lot of saving for your retirement if you're not in a position to be able to meet an unexpected expense, because actually then you might have to go to credit, and that might end up costing you a lot more. So I think the first priority should probably be for people to develop a buffer for short-term expenses, so short-term saving first, and then think more thoroughly about where they want to be in terms of long-term or retirement savings.
Thank you very much. And Neyber will be out in the atrium as with all our other sponsors. They've got the stands there, so perhaps pick up the conversation then as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Debbie.